Hello everybody, and thank you for joining the webinar today with us. It's really great to have everybody here. Some of you we can see already know Northdoor as an organisation, have worked with us, and there's some organisations that we haven't worked with, and it'll be good to just give you a bit of insight into who we are and what we do. So the agenda today will give you a bit of background into who we are as an organisation. We'll talk about data platform challenges, why you should modernise your data platform, the potential target platforms that you can look at going to, the data platform modernisation process. We'll have a conversation about what that consists of and how we might be able to help you to go through that process. Fabian from Bytes will be talking about licensing, and we'll then give you a bit of information about an event and workshop offer that's coming up on the 20th of September. And then there'll be an opportunity for you to pose questions and for us to answer those questions. Just a very brief overview with regards to who we are as an organisation. So we're a business that's been established for over 30 years now. We're based in the City of London. We're an IT consultancy focused on data and providing data consultancy, implementation and support services. We've got an approach which is to advise our customers, provide implementation services and management services, and we're very focused around Microsoft. So we're a gold partner. We have full gold competencies at the moment, which consists of BI, cloud, which is obviously Azure when it comes to Microsoft, application development as we develop our own applications in-house, and data analytics and data platform, which data platform obviously covers SQL, SQL Server. So that's us. So I'll hand you over now to our CTO, James Cherry, and James can go into deeper things.
Thanks, Richard, and good morning, everyone. So I'd like to just briefly go across some of the data platform challenges that we've seen with our clients over the last 12 to 18 months. And we've put these into four main areas. So the end of life on SQL 2018 being the first one that we're going to talk about, followed by data security and governance with a bit of a focus on GDPR, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Business intelligence, analytics and AI, so how to really use that data on the data platform. And then I'll be handing it back to Richard to talk about the management, maintenance and cost of ownership. So to kick off, if you weren't aware, SQL 28 mainstream support ends summer next year, so with less than 325 days before that happens, and support for SQL Server 2005 ended in 2016. So what that means for most people is that there's going to be no further security updates, and with that in mind, we need to take a view about how regulators and regulated industries run their technology, and we've seen that regulators take a very dim view of running out of support software. So if you are on SQL Server 2005 or SQL Server 2008, you really need to have a plan in place to modernise that platform. And it's also worth bearing in mind how old that technology is. So if we look at SQL Server 2008, it is aging now, and if we think about the technology at the time, that was really when Apple launched the App Store. It's when Amazon launched the Kindle. So if you're running your platform on that technology of that time, you're really missing out on some of the newer technology that's available. For SQL Server 2008, we're going to talk about some options for extending support on that. We'll come on to that both in our deck and Fabian around licensing. So one of the main topics that I speak to when I'm talking to companies at the moment is really around GDPR and how they can ensure compliance with GDPR and improve their data security. So really not a day goes past where we see something in the news about breaches of data, and part of the overall security process that we need to look at involves that data platform. Now, if you're running old versions of SQL Server, you're missing out on some of the security features on the newer versions, such as data encryption, row-level security, and data masking. Data encryption is one of the main things that companies ask about in terms of GDPR and how they can easily encrypt their data. Also, if you've got data spread over a number of silos, it can be hard to put a consistent policy over that in terms of security, and that presents challenges to the business in terms of GDPR, data discovery, classification, and dealing with SARS requests. So part of the modernisation process that we do looks at actually the consolidation of an estate and really simplifying that and making it easier to work with, so we can have consistent policies for that. Business intelligence, analytics, and AI are all key aspects that businesses are looking at today. And what we particularly see is organisations wanting to move from the rear view mirror kind of view of what happened and why did it happen, which is typically delivered through reports and interactive dashboards, to more of a forward-looking model. So what will happen and what should I do about that? Now, having the aspiration to do that is great, but what we've seen is one of the main blockers is the data estate, and having your data in a good shape prior to trying to implement some of these new products and services that are on the market. If you fail to get your estate in a good shape, what you can look at ending up with is faster access to the wrong answer. So having bad data or badly governed data means that your analytics are based on that. And people struggling to deliver self-service analytics. So if you look at products like Power BI, they put the power into the end user's hands, but if you haven't got a well-governed data estate, discoverable data, that can be quite a challenge. So I'm just going to hand over to Richard, who's going to talk about the cost of ownership on some of these estates based on the experience that we've had with a number of clients.
Thank you, James. Yes, so one of the big drivers that we found when we've been delivering modernisation projects for customers, and we've been doing this for probably the last 3 or 4 years, it's been quite a common project for us, has been the cost of looking after a SQL Server environment. And that cost of ownership is broken down into a number of different areas, which we've got listed here on the slide deck. And having worked with public sector organisations, we've done a lot of work for this within the NHS, for local government, but also in the private sector. But a good example is the NHS, where they've had a historic licensing agreement which covers SQL for the whole of the NHS. So spinning up SQL Server instances didn't add any additional cost at that time. When that license model expired, suddenly they've realised they've got hundreds of SQL instances. They need to now license it on a core level, and it's going to cost a huge amount of money. So the big driver in that scenario is to consolidate the SQL Server environment, look at putting SQL on a small number of host boxes and licensing those host servers and reducing that cost dramatically as being one option, of which Fabian will probably talk about, there being some others as well. Obviously, the larger the estate, the more complex the estate, the more difficult it is to look after. So you're going to need more DBAs. You're going to need to have, more monitoring licenses, whatever it is, however it is that you look after your environment. It's just going to cost you more, and it's going to require more effort to do that and to make sure that it's performing to a level that satisfies your organisation. James talked about migrations and upgrades. Obviously, one of the reasons is to take advantage of new features and benefits from the latest versions of SQL, but also there's the compliance aspect. And again, with public sector, they can't be on unsupported versions. So there's a drive to just do that as a natural process. Disaster recovery, there's lots of options now. If you look at using Azure, for example, you can put some very, very tight disaster recovery in place at a fraction of the cost of having to have a secondary data center, for example, as might be in a historic scenario. Power consumption, the cost of having secondary data centers, we can look at not having to have these, or look at ways of reducing the costs around these. And finally, lots of organizations will have 3 of the same environment, one for production, one for dev, one for test. And, again, you could be paying out for 3 times the amount of services or management costs that surround these. And then finally, your storage and e-commerce costs as well. So there's a lot to think about and a lot of ways of being able to start to bring that cost down.
Thanks, Richard. So the question really is, why should I modernise my data platform? I've really tried to summarise that in these 5 points here, and this is based on our experience with working with a number of organisations. Quite simply, you're going to save money. Virtually every engagement that we've had where we've done a platform moderniser exercise, we've helped clients save significant amounts of money. And in one instance that Richard mentioned, the NHS Trust, it was over $250,000 in the first year. So big sums of money can be saved on that. Although that's a great driver, it's not the only one. So having a modern platform using the latest technology and consolidated estate is going to mean you're going to end up with your data in a more secure area. You can have access to those security features that are going to ease compliance with GDPR. And that platform will be ready for your business to become more data driven and taking advantage of the new platforms in analytics and AI. And lastly, enterprise class business continuity becomes available to everyone. A lot of companies I've spoken and worked with before have desired to have really good RPO and RTO. However, it comes with such a cost, and now the options that are available on the newer versions of the data platform mean that's open to everyone. So when we modernize our platform, we look at different targets. Now, Richard and Paul will talk through the approach that we take to the platform modernization process, but what we just want to focus on here now is what are those target platforms, what are their key benefits, and why they should be considered. And then if there's any specific questions, we'll be able to pick those up at the end of the deck. So I'm just going to hand over to Paul now, who's going to kick off talking about SQL Server 2017.
Right, thank you, James. As James said, I'm Paul Cayley. I'm currently the SQL practice manager here at Northdoor. And I'm going to talk through 5 points basically around SQL 2017. So 2017, one of the key drivers for all organizations to upgrade has to be the database engine. There's been massive improvements from 25 all the way through, and engine features are often hidden, but there's an awful lot has evolved from 2016 and 2017 around caching. That's a massive gain in terms of performance, but also in terms of the resources needed to run your servers. Furthermore, we've got standard edition. Previously, there was a lot of people who didn't actually upgrade because they didn't feel they were gaining any benefits with standard edition, but now with 2017, a lot more features are unlocked for standard edition that were previously only enterprise. We've also got the security, a key thing James and Richard have spoke about around GDPR and compliance. There's numerous features around advanced security features. And the final point on there is integration to R and Python. Both of these will give you advanced features around statistical external components to SQL Server within the database engine. Okay, another driver for upgrading is Azure. It's cloud and it gives you mainly benefits around your management of the platform. Azure running a Windows-only environment allows you to spin up SQL Server on that platform, and it gives you extended support for SQL Server. SQL Server 2008 rather. This is out of mainstream support. It's in extended support at the moment, and that runs through until July next year. But by running your SQL 2008 R2 in Azure, you actually get a further 3 years support from Microsoft. And this is obviously compliance and security patching as well. What Azure gives you for running SQL is it gives you far less management. So you can spin up, deploy servers very quickly, and these servers are built by the Microsoft team, and they're pre-configured to MS best practice, and it just means that you can get an Azure server spinning and running within a few minutes, and it's great to have that. Plus, you've got the benefit that you can trash and burn, and you only pay per minute. So you can basically run a server for an hour and without having all those costs of actually deploying the hardware yourselves. Okay, and generally it's just great. Okay, the final slide that I'm going to talk about today is SQL Azure Database. Previously this was referred to as PaaS. They've kind of dropped that term, but Azure SQL Database gives you a fully managed platform, gives you flexible machine sizes. You don't have to worry about Windows patching. You don't have to worry about SQL service packs. You don't have to worry about your backups. So you get point-in-time recovery out of the box without doing anything. And with that in mind, anybody can really run from the ground up. You've got instant recoverability of your data. And furthermore, you've got inbuilt monitoring and tuning, as well as alerting to problems within your server. And you've got dashboards through the Microsoft OMS portal. So that covers the three features that I'm going to talk about. I'm now going to hand you back to James, who will talk about Azure Data Warehouse and managed services within Azure.
Thanks, Paul. So that's really great, Paul, focusing there on Azure SQL Database, the platform as a service offering from Microsoft. And that means if you've got the SQL Server on premise today, if you can make that transition over to Azure SQL Database, you can really reduce your costs in terms of managing that platform. So Microsoft look after a lot of the things that we have to do day to day. And it also gives you a massive amount of flexibility. But it's important to recognize that not every SQL Server instance is an easy transition to Azure SQL Database. There are some features and functions that aren't available on that, which is why Microsoft really brought the Azure SQL Database managed instance online. So this is pretty much the same as the fully managed PaaS offering, Azure SQL Database, but what it does give is fully fledged SQL compatibility, nearly 100%. So virtually everybody's on-prem SQL Server would be able to move over with virtually no code change, no application change, and take benefit of some of the additional features that are part of managed instance. And most of those are around security. So some of the, I wouldn't say issues, but some of the things that restrict the use of Azure SQL Database are things like private IP addresses and native VNet implementations. Now, if these are a requirement for you, the Azure SQL Database managed instance brings those online. So very good offering. In most cases, a lift and shift from an on-prem, and you get all the benefits of platform as a service. So Microsoft managing both the infrastructure and the platform for you with very high compatibility with your applications today. So one thing to look at in terms of that transition. The next thing we'll look at is Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Now, many companies that I speak to have data warehousing on premise, and that comes with a lot of challenges in terms of both data size, performance, and managing the estate. And Azure SQL Data Warehouse is a platform as a service offering from Microsoft that really is data warehouse as a service, completely managed, offering petabyte scale and seamless integration into both products like Power BI and Tableau, and also some of the data extraction and load tools like data lakes and Databricks, for example. It's a very good platform, one that should be considered if you're looking at moving your SQL Server data warehouse to a more modern platform, one that scales far more easily than the typical on-premise. So one example where I've worked with customers on this before is really around dev and test environments. If you've got a very large data warehouse, there can often be challenges in bringing those environments online to deal with issues within production data. And with Azure SQL Data Warehouse, you're able to bring those online in minutes and pay per minute and close them down when they're no longer required. So those are the platforms that we look at in terms of the modernisation process. And I'm now just going to hand you over to Richard, who's going to talk about the process and what we do with our customers in terms of bringing that online.
Thanks, James. Yeah, so we've, as I said before, we've done lots of these pieces of work, and therefore we have an internal process that we go through to help organisations to go through the process. We look at it typically in two phases. You've got the design process, and then you've got the implementation process. So where the design process comes in, the first thing we look at doing is a discovery exercise. So we need to establish how many SQL instances, how many SQL servers there are running in your environment and where they're located. And we need to draw up a list of those, and then have a review of what we think is in scope in terms of the new environment. You know, if you're going to be decommissioning some of those, obviously they'll be crossed off the list, but it's coming up with a master list of instances or master list of servers that are going to be in scope going forward, and we can help you go through that process using the tools that we have. We then need to work with you know, the LSP, which in our instance here would be Bytes Software Services. So Bytes would help to establish what the effective licensing position is at that moment in time. So are you over licensed? Are you under licensed for your current environment? Which would give us an understanding of the license model that you have and the number of licenses that are we can use for the future environment. We'd then look at auditing the estate, and we'd run some monitoring software over the estate for a set period of time, typically 4 weeks, to capture any peaks and troughs. We would be looking to understand what the compute resource requirements are from that SQL pool, and we'd also be looking at the performance of each of those SQL instances and what they're doing. And we traffic light those instances to get an understanding of you know, which instance effectively needs what going forward. We'd also carry out some sort of environment audit in terms of an existing audit of what you have, how many data centers, how many servers, physical, virtual, all of the typical things that you would expect. And then we'd have a workshop where we'd look at establishing what a target environment might look like. Are you looking for a hybrid SQL Server environment going forward? Are you looking for an environment purely in Azure? So it's having those conversations. Are you utilizing existing hardware? Are you looking to buy new hardware? Are you looking to buy no hardware? So it's, you know, typically a half-day workshop to give us some understanding of what you think the utopian estate might look like. We'll then go away, and Paul and some of his team would work together to look at, okay, what design options, environment and licensing design options could we come up with? And that might be a couple of different designs and what the associated license model might apply to those new designs. And then once that's agreed, we'd move on to the implementation stage. So at that point, I'll hand you over to Fabian from Bytes, and Fabian can talk about the SQL Server licensing.
Hello, hi. So I am going to talk about the licensing for SQL Server. There are 3 main editions for SQL Server 2017: Express, which is free; Standard, which is licensed server and cal or per core; and Enterprise, which is licensed per core. So what I will do is go through the licensing of server and cal and per core. So SQL Server Standard can be licensed on a server and cal basis, and also if you have older enterprise licenses where SA has been renewed since 2008 R2 from old licenses. Now, when you license on a server and cal basis, you license each operating system environment where you run SQL with a SQL Server license, which means you can have separate databases and instances in one virtual machine or one operating system environment with only one license. And then you also need to license every user or device that accesses the server directly or indirectly with a client access license. Now, when we talk about indirect access, what we mean is that if your SQL Server is the backend for an application, for example, every user accessing that application does need to be licensed with a SQL Server Client Access License. SQL Server can also be licensed per core, and that's for both the standard and enterprise edition. Now, when you license per core, what you do is you count the number of cores either per processor if you're running the software on a physical box, or number of cores assigned to the virtual machines where SQL is running if that's where you're running SQL. There is a minimum of 4 core per processor or 4 core per virtual machine, depending on where you install the software. And those licenses are purchased in packs of 2. When you do license SQL Server on a per core basis, you don't need to worry about licensing the users and devices with client access licenses. You do get unlimited access provided for both internal and external users. Now let's have a look at the virtualization licensing. So when you license SQL Server for virtualization, if you do that with the server and cal model, what you do is license each individual box running SQL Server with a server license, and then, as we've seen, license every user or device with a client access license. If you're using the core model, as we've seen, you wouldn't need a client access license, but what you need to do then is count the number of cores that you've assigned to the virtual machines. There is a minimum of 4 core licenses that have to be purchased per VM. So if you've assigned only 2 cores to your virtual machines, you still need to buy 4 core licenses. There is another option available only to the Enterprise Edition, which is unlimited virtualization. So if you license the physical box and you license every core in every physical processor in that box with software assurance with the Enterprise Edition, you can run an unlimited number of virtual machines with SQL on that license host. Now, when you license SQL Server, the license is always assigned to the actual physical box, whether you're licensing the virtual machine or not. And that license cannot go from one server to another more than every 90 days. So you can't reassign that license to another server for more than every 90 days. So if you are licensing the virtual machines and they're going from one host to another, to go around that rule, you can license those virtual machines with software assurance, and that removes that 90-day rule, meaning you can move that virtual machine from one host to another. Now that's if you're licensing the individual VMs. If you're licensing the physical box with SQL Server, with software assurance for unlimited virtualization, what you'll have to do then is license every host in the cluster if you have a cluster of SQL Server, where they all might fall on those hosts. Now, with software assurance, you'll also get license mobility across server farm, also known as license mobility for SA, which in effect will allow you to run your virtual machines from your hosts to a third-party provider or to Azure. So if you're doing infrastructure as a service, you can use your own licenses. And we'll look at more of that in a second. Software assurance will also give you failover rights. So with failover rights, when you license active servers with software assurance, you can install the same amount of passive servers without having to license that passive server, as long as you license the active with software assurance. They do have to be on the same environment. So if you're installing the active on premises, the passive must be on premises. If you're installing the active server in the cloud with infrastructure as a service, then you can also license your passive with that software assurance. So you don't have to license the passive server. What you can't do is have, for example, an active server on premises and not license the passive server in the cloud. And as we've talked about, the support for Windows Server and SQL Server 2008 and 2008 R2, the extended support for that is ending for SQL Server in July 2019, which means there will be no more options to have security updates for those servers. So if those workloads cannot be upgraded to the latest version, you can migrate it to Azure, as we've seen earlier, and get free extended support for an additional 3 years. Well, of course, you can upgrade that. There is also an option to purchase extended support for on-premises, but that is costed as 75% the cost of the license, and you do have to have software assurance on those instances as well. Now, if you are choosing to move those SQL instances to Azure, one of the ways to do that from a licensing perspective is to use what is called the SQL Server Hybrid Benefits. And that SQL Server Hybrid Benefit is available to active software assurance customers as long as you have active SA on SQL Server instances, and that allows you to run SQL Server in virtual machines, so infrastructure as a service virtual machines. And instead of paying for SQL on a pay-as-you-go basis, you can pay for SQL using your own licenses. It also gives you a 180-day migration period. So for a period of 180 days, you can run SQL Server both on premises and in the cloud for migration purposes. There is again that minimum of 4 core per virtual machine when you license SQL using your hybrid benefits. The hybrid benefit can also be used to cover the Azure SQL databases, so the platform as a service SQL Server. Again, you will pay for the part of the SQL managed services for the license part of that using your own licenses. It is done on a 1 core license to 1 vCore ratio. So if you license your SQL Server managed services in Azure on a per vCore basis, you can purchase those vCores using your own licenses. And then finally in Azure, Microsoft has released what they're calling SQL Server Reserved Capacity. And again, that's to do with the Azure SQL database. That has just been released, and it allows you to prepay for your SQL database platform as a service in Azure for 1 or 3 years. You can save up to 33% doing it that way, which means that you would see the savings from prepaying for your SQL database in Azure and then paying for the licensing element through your software assurance. And that is all for me, and I'll pass you back on to Northdoor to end the call.
Thanks very much. Very interesting information there on licensing. So if you are on SQL Server 2005 and 2008, you need to start planning, and in conjunction with Bytes and Microsoft, we have 2 offers to try and help you on that journey. So there's an in-person event on HMS Belfast on Thursday the 20th of September, where we'll be going into this in quite some more detail. There'll be some demonstrations of those different Azure offerings and the platforms and what they can do, and some deeper information on both the licensing along with some case studies. So if you'd like to attend that, there's an option on the survey at the end of the webinar, but also get in contact with your Bytes account manager or anyone at Northdoor. If you want to really get going, we have an offer again through Bytes and Microsoft for a free 1-day platform modernization workshop. This is normally a costed exercise, but we're giving this for free as an offer to the people on this call, where we'll come in and we'll give you some indicative information about how you might be able to move your existing data platform, indications of the savings that can be made through licensing and the modernisation, as well as discuss some of the aspects of the Azure platform as a service offerings and whether they're appropriate for your business. So again, options to take those at the end of the survey, or do get in contact with your account manager either on the phone or by email. So to wrap up, I'm now just going to hand over to Casey to end the webinar, but also opportunity for any questions coming out of that. So thank you all.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Fabienne, Richard and Paul, for your time on the webinar today. I'm just going to pull up the questions to see if we do have any, so just give me a moment. You can pop them in the questions box on the right hand side of your screen if you do have some.
Okay, so we have a question on here. What is RPO or RTO? So that really is around business continuity and recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. So in the event of a disaster, companies try to put a value on the amount of time and the amount of data that they're willing to lose. So you might have a recovery point objective of 5 minutes and a recovery time objective of, say, an hour. So in those examples, the point objective being 5 minutes would be the business is willing to lose 5 minutes worth of data, and the time objective is, in the event of a disaster, to come back online, it would be 30 minutes. So businesses normally look to put values on RPO and RTO, and with some of the new enterprise features that are available in SQL Server and the Azure platform as a service offerings, we can get enterprise class RPO and RTO, which would otherwise be extremely expensive and require mirrored data centers and that type of thing.
Thank you, James. Fabienne, I think there may be a question for you around the licensing. Someone's asked, if you're using hybrid benefit and your on-prem version has not migrated before the end of life date, will Microsoft continue to provide security patches for the on-prem server, that is?
So unfortunately, no, the end of life extended support will only apply to SQL Server migrated to Azure. So you'll only get security patches to Azure unless you purchase the extended support.
Perfect, thank you. Someone else has asked, what is the tipping point between each SQL license model that helped you quantify changing your licensing entitlement?
There isn't really an exact answer to that, because every customer's data center will be different. So sometimes server and CAD is cheaper, sometimes the licensing each individual virtual machine is better, sometimes licensing the enterprise host is better. It really depends on the number of hosts you have, how big your cluster is, number of virtual machine, and number of users accessing.
Thanks for that answer. I think if you do have questions around that, you could take advantage of the workshop offer. We can come in and try and explain those different licensing models and how they would impact your business. So do give us a shout if that would be helpful.
Perfect, thank you. So if there are any other more questions for Northdoor or indeed our licensing, you can pop them into the questions box. Alternatively, you can email tell me more at bytes.co.uk or speak directly to your Bytes account manager. Or as James says, register for our workshop coming up on the 20th of September, and then you can have a bit more of a face-to-face conversation with the experts. So the webinar recording will be made available to you in the next 24 hours or so, so I'll share that around. And just want to say a big thank you to everyone's contribution today on the webinar and for all of you sitting there watching this morning. So on that note, thank you very much.